His transport lay scattered across the crystalline landscape below, twisted metal and sparking circuits, painting an ugly scar against the pristine white expanse. The emergency beacon blinked weakly from his wrist display. 43 hours until the next rescue window. His oxygen reserves wouldn't last half that time. Cale pressed his back against the cliff face, watching his breath form clouds in the sub-zero air. The Interstellar Wildlife Rescue Corps had warned him about this mission. Zirian 7 wasn't just another frozen wasteland. It was home to the Shadow Maw Pack, creatures that had driven 3 separate research teams off-world in the past decade. The Galactic Council classified them as unreasonably hostile, a diplomatic way of saying they killed everything that moved. A sound echoed across the tundra, low, resonant, and unmistakably predatory. Cale's hand instinctively moved toward his plasma rifle, then stopped. The Corps had taught him that weapons were tools of last resort, not first response. Still, as more howls joined the first, creating a symphony of barely contained violence, he wondered if his philosophy would survive the night. The temperature dropped another degree according to his suit's readings. Frostbite was already setting in despite the heating elements, and his injured leg throbbed with each heartbeat. During the crash, a piece of debris had punctured his suit's outer layer, and the emergency sealant was already beginning to fail. Dark spots danced at the edges of his vision, hypothermia's calling card. Through the swirling snow, shapes moved with fluid grace across the landscape. They were larger than the mission briefings had suggested, easily the size of Earth's ancient grizzly bears, but built for speed rather than bulk. Their fur seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, making them appear as living shadows against the white backdrop. Silver eyes gleamed like stars in the perpetual twilight of Zirian 7's polar region. One of the creatures broke from the pack, approaching with deliberate steps. Each paw print it left in the snow was the size of Cale's helmet. The Shadow Maw 4, that's surely what it was, stopped just outside the range of his emergency light, tilting its massive head as if studying him. Its breath formed great clouds of vapor that hung in the still air like ghostly warnings. Cale felt the familiar tingle of telepathic contact, something the Corps had trained him to recognize, but never properly experience. Images flashed through his mind, not words, but concepts, hunger, curiosity, and something else. Something that surprised him. Caution. This creature wasn't approaching him as prey. It was approaching him as an unknown, potentially dangerous entity. "I'm not here to hurt you," Cale whispered, knowing the words were meaningless but hoping the intent behind them might translate through whatever telepathic link existed between them. The Shadow Mawser flicked a subtle movement that somehow conveyed acknowledgement. For a moment, predator and human regarded each other across the divide of species, evolution, and expectation. Then the creature did something extraordinary. It settled onto its haunches in the snow, wrapping its tail around its front paws, and simply watched, not with the patience of a hunter waiting for its prey to weaken, but with the attentiveness of a sentinel standing guard, as if it understood that this small, fragile being was already fighting a battle against the elements that would determine whether he lived or died. The wind picked up again, and Cale pulled his knees closer to his chest, conserving what little body heat remained. His suit's power indicator showed critical levels, maybe 2 hours of heating left, if he was lucky. The irony wasn't lost on him that he might die of cold while being watched by one of the galaxy's most feared predators, a creature perfectly adapted to this harsh environment. As consciousness began to slip away, Cale's last clear thought was surprise at how beautiful the Shadow Maw's eyes were, like twin moons, reflecting an inner light that spoke of intelligence far beyond what any xenobiologist had ever suspected. Cale woke to warmth, not the artificial heat of his failing suit, but something organic and comforting. His eyes opened slowly, adjusting to a dim, amber-colored light that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. He was lying in what appeared to be a natural cave, its smooth surfaces suggesting water erosion over countless millennia. But this wasn't just any cave. The walls were covered in intricate patterns that seemed almost like writing, flowing symbols that hurt to look at directly. The Shadow Maw sat near the cave entrance, silhouetted against the pale light filtering in from outside. Cale's suit readings showed his body temperature had stabilized, though he couldn't understand how. The puncture in his suit had been sealed not with his emergency kit, which remained unused on his belt, but with some kind of organic resin that formed a perfect patch over the damaged area. "You helped me," Cale said, his voice barely above a whisper. The words felt inadequate, but the Shadow Maw's ears perked up at the sound. Those silver eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made him feel simultaneously vulnerable and protected. Images flashed through his mind again, clearer. This time, he saw himself as the creature saw him, small, fragile, leaking heat into the cold like a dying star. But there was something else in the mental picture, determination, even unconscious and near death. Something about Kel's presence had communicated purpose rather than surrender. The shadow maw rose and padded deeper into the cave, returning moments later with something clutched delicately in its jaws. Kel's emergency rations somehow retrieved from the wreckage of his transport. The creature set them down within reach, then retreated to its watching post by the entrance. "Thank you," Kel said, meaning it more than he'd meant anything in years. He'd spent his career studying the behavioral patterns of dangerous species, learning to read the subtle signs that separated aggression from fear, territory defense from predatory stalking. But this was different. This creature wasn't just exhibiting complex behavior, it was demonstrating compassion. As he ate, Kel noticed more details about his rescuer. The shadow maw's fur wasn't actually black, but a deep purple that seemed to shift and flow like liquid night. Scars crossed its flanks and shoulders, old wounds that spoke of battle survived and territory defended. This was an apex predator, in its prime, capable of taking down prey many times Kel's size without effort. And yet it had chosen to save him. The telepathic connection opened again, but this time Kel felt himself being drawn into deeper communication, not just images, but emotions and concepts that had no human equivalent. He experienced the shadow maw's perspective on the crash, the sudden appearance of fire and metal in its territory, the scent of fear and pain, and something else that took him several minutes to understand: recognition. This creature had encountered humans before, not the research teams that had fled in terror, but others, individuals who had approached with different intentions. Through the shadow maw's memories, Kel saw glimpses of humans who had come not to study or capture, but to understand. They had left offerings, not traps. They had shown respect, not dominance. The shadow maw had been watching humanity's gradual expansion into this sector of space, evaluating their intentions through careful observation. Most species that encountered the shadow maws responded with fear or aggression, emotions that triggered the pack's defensive instincts. But some humans had shown something different: curiosity tempered with respect, courage balanced with humility. Outside the cave, the wind had died down, and Kel could see the aurora-like phenomenon that gave Zirian 7's nights their ethereal beauty. Sheets of green and gold light danced across the sky, reflected and amplified by the planet's crystalline formations. It was breathtaking, a reminder that even the most hostile environments could harbor incredible beauty. "The others will come, looking for me," Kel said, not sure if he was warning the shadow maw or reassuring it. "My people, they're not like the ones who came before. We're trying to do better." The creature's mental response carried a complex mixture of hope and skepticism. It had seen too many promises broken, too many gestures of peace that turned into attempts at exploitation. But something about Kel's presence, his calm acceptance of vulnerability in the face of a superior predator, suggested that perhaps this human was different. As the night deepened, Kel felt the shadow maw's guardianship like a protective blanket around the cave. Whatever pack hierarchy had existed, this creature had taken personal responsibility for his safety. It was a decision that would have consequences beyond their immediate interaction, a choice that would echo through the complex social structure of the shadow maw pack, and potentially change the trajectory of human-shadow maw relations forever. Dawn on Zirian 7 came not as a sunrise, but as a gradual brightening of the aurora-filled sky. Kel woke to find his guardian gone, though the warmth of its presence lingered in the cave. His suit's systems showed significant improvement. The emergency power had somehow been supplemented, and his oxygen reserves were mysteriously fuller than they'd been the night before. The shadow maw had done more than simply shelter him. It had actively worked to keep him alive. Moving carefully on his injured leg, Kel made his way to the cave entrance. The landscape beyond was transformed by daylight, revealing not the barren wasteland he'd expected, but a complex ecosystem of ice formations, thermal vents, and hardy vegetation that created pockets of life throughout the frozen terrain. In the distance, he could see movement, multiple shadow maws moving through their territory with purpose and coordination that spoke of sophisticated pack intelligence. His rescuer appeared at the ridge above the cave, and Kel felt the now familiar tingle of telepathic contact. But this time, the mental images were accompanied by physical gestures, a complex series of postures and movements that seemed to be some form of communication. The shadow maw was trying to teach him its language. Over the next several hours, Kale found himself in the most unusual classroom of his career. The Shadow Maw he'd started thinking of it as whisper due to the soft, almost silent way it moved demonstrated various concepts, through combinations of mental imagery and physical positioning. A lowered head with ears forward meant curiosity. A specific tail position indicated territorial boundaries. The angle of the shoulders communicated everything from submission to challenge. What struck Kale most was the complexity of the social concepts being conveyed. These weren't simple predator-prey dynamics, but sophisticated cultural constructs. The Shadow Maws had concepts of hospitality, guardianship, and what could only be described as honor. When a creature chose to protect another, it became responsible for that being's well-being within the pack's understanding of justice and reciprocity. By afternoon, Kale had learned enough of the basic gestural language to communicate simple concepts. When he successfully demonstrated the posture for gratitude, a deep bow, with arms extended, Whisper's response was unmistakably pleased. The telepathic connection carried what could only be described as satisfaction, mixed with something that resembled hope. That evening, as they shared another meal of emergency rations, supplemented by some kind of nutritious root that Whisper had gathered, Kale began to understand the magnitude of what was happening. This wasn't just a rescue, it was first contact of a kind that no xenobiologist had ever documented. Two species, separated by evolution and biology, were finding common ground through mutual respect and patience. "My people are coming," Kale said, using both words and the gestures he'd learned to convey the concept. "Tomorrow, maybe the day after, they'll want to understand what happened here." Whisper's response was complex images of other humans, memories of both positive and negative encounters, and questions about intentions and promises. Through the telepathic link, Kale felt the weight of representing his entire species in this moment. The choices he made, the way he conducted himself, would influence how the Shadow Maws responded to future human contact. "I want to offer you something," Kale continued, reaching into his pack for one of his most prized possessions, a photograph of Earth, taken from orbit, showing the blue marble of humanity's homeworld floating in the cosmic darkness. "This is where I come from, where we all come from." Whisper studied the image with intense focus, and through their mental connection, Kale felt the creature's recognition of the gesture's significance. This wasn't scientific data or territorial information, it was personal, intimate, a sharing of something precious and irreplaceable. In the Shadow Maw's cultural understanding, such gifts created bonds that transcended simple exchange. The creature disappeared into the depths of the cave, returning with something that took Kale's breath away. It was a crystal formation, naturally occurring but shaped by some kind of tool use into a perfect representation of Zirian 7's aurora. Light seemed to flow through its structure, creating miniature versions of the sky phenomenon that had so captivated him the night before. "It's beautiful," Kale whispered, accepting the gift with the same reverence he'd observed in Whisper's approach to the photograph. The crystal was warm to the touch, and as he held it, he felt an echo of the telepathic connection, not intrusive or overwhelming, but comforting, like the memory of a friend's presence. That night, as they settled into their respective sleeping arrangements, Kale realized that something fundamental had changed. He was no longer a human being rescued by an alien predator. He was part of something larger, a bridge between species, a translator of intentions, a guardian of possibilities that extended far beyond his individual survival. Outside the cave, other Shadow Maws had begun to gather, not threateningly, but with the careful attention of a community observing something unprecedented. Word of the strange alliance between human and Shadow Maw was spreading through the pack's telepathic network, creating ripples that would soon reach beyond this frozen world to the stars themselves. Tomorrow, when the rescue ships arrived, everything would change. But tonight, in a cave lit by aurora crystal and warmed by interspecies understanding, Kale, Torres, and Whisper had created something that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of what it meant to be civilized. The rescue ships arrived like mechanical thunder against Zirian 7's perpetual aurora, their engines carving contrails through the crystalline atmosphere. From the cave entrance, Kale watched 3 Corps vessels descend toward his beacon's location, standard protocol for a missing operative. But as he prepared to signal them, Whisper's mental touch carried an edge of anxiety that made him pause. Through their telepathic connection, Kale felt the Shadow Maw's perspective on the approaching vessels. These weren't just rescue ships to Whisper, they were potential threats, unknown quantities that could shatter the fragile trust that had been built over the past 2 days. The pack's collective memory held too many instances of peaceful contact, turning violent, of scientific curiosity becoming exploitation. I need to go to them, Cale said, using the gestural language they developed alongside his words. But I want you to know whatever happens, what we've shared here matters. It's going to make a difference. Whisper's response was complex, layered with protective instincts and deeper concerns. Through their bond, Cale felt the creature's internal struggle, the desire to keep him safe warring with understanding that he belonged with his own kind. But beneath these surface emotions lay something more profound: trust. Despite every evolutionary and cultural reason to be suspicious, Whisper had chosen to believe in Cale's good intentions. The descent to the crash site took longer than expected with his injured leg, and by the time Cale reached the landing zone, the rescue team had established a perimeter around the wreckage. Captain Saracen, his commanding officer, spotted him first and ran across the snow-covered terrain with the efficiency of someone who'd conducted too many body retrievals. Torres, thank God you're alive, she said, her relief evident even through her helmet's comm system. We detected thermal signatures in the area, indigenous life forms. Were you harassed by the local predators? No harassment, Cale replied carefully, accepting the emergency blanket one of the medics wrapped around his shoulders. Actually, quite the opposite. I was helped. The statement created a ripple of surprised silence among the rescue team. Dr. Marcus Webb, the mission's xenobiologist, stepped forward with the eager expression Cale had learned to be wary of. Webb had a reputation for aggressive data collection, and his presence on a rescue mission was unusual. Helped how? Webb asked, already activating his recording equipment. Did you make contact with the Shadow Moss? What was the nature of the interaction? Before Cale could answer, movement on the ridge above caught everyone's attention. Whisper had appeared, no longer the solitary figure from the cave, but accompanied by 5 other pack members. They moved with deliberate purpose, positioning themselves where they could observe the human gathering without being threatening. Their body language, Cale realized, was carefully neutral, curious but cautious. Incredible, Webb breathed, his equipment already scanning and recording. They're exhibiting coordinated surveillance behavior. This suggests much higher intelligence than our previous assessments, indicated Dr. Webb, Cale said, his voice carrying a warning that made the xenobiologist look up from his instruments. These aren't specimens, they're people, different from us, but people nonetheless. How we handle this moment is going to determine whether we build something meaningful or destroy it. Captain Chen studied the Shadow Moss through her helmet's enhanced vision system, noting their positioning and apparent calm. Her military training had taught her to read tactical situations, and what she saw didn't match the hostile predator classification in their mission files. Explain, she ordered, her tone suggesting she was prepared to listen rather than simply extract her wounded operative. Over the next 30 minutes, Cale related his experience in the cave, carefully emphasizing the sophisticated nature of Shadow Moss society and the deliberate choice Whisper had made to provide aid. He described the gestural language, the gift, exchange, and most importantly, the telepathic communication that had revealed complex cultural concepts. Webb's excitement was palpable, but Chen remained focused on broader implications. You're suggesting these creatures have some form of civilization? That they've been evaluating humanity's intentions rather than simply defending territory? That's exactly what I'm suggesting, Cale confirmed, and right now, they're watching us to see what kind of people we really are. This is a test, Captain, not just of our ability to communicate, but of our worthiness to be trusted. As if summoned by his words, Whisper began to descend the ridge alone, moving with the careful dignity Cale had come to associate with formal communication. The other Shadow Moss remained in position, ready to retreat or advance based on what happened next. Nobody make any sudden movements, Chen ordered, though her team was already following standard first contact protocols. Dr. Webb, passive observation only, no active scanning without my authorization. Whisper approached within 20 meters of the human group, then settled into the formal communication posture Cale recognized. The telepathic touch was gentler this time, broadcast broadly enough that several team members flinched as they felt the alien mental contact. Through the connection, Whisper shared images not just of Cale's rescue, but of the broader context, memories of other human expeditions, some respectful and some exploitative, visions of packed discussions about the strange bipedal visitors who sometimes showed wisdom, and sometimes showed only hunger for knowledge without understanding. The message was clear. Humanity was being evaluated. The Shadow Moss had the ability to defend themselves against unwanted intrusion, but they preferred to judge intentions before acting. They were offering partnership to those who proved worthy of trust. Dr. Webb started to raise his scanner, then stopped as he felt the weight of multiple predatory gazes upon him. The other Shadow Maws hadn't moved, but their attention was suddenly focused on him with an intensity that made his survival instincts scream warnings. Dr. Webb, Captain Chen said quietly, I suggest you put that away, permanently. The xenobiologist reluctantly lowered his equipment, and the tension among the watching Shadow Maws visibly decreased. Whisper's mental touch carried what could only be described as approval. The first test had been passed. Kale stepped forward, using the gestural language to communicate gratitude and peaceful intentions. Whisper responded in kind, then did something that stunned everyone present. The great predator bowed not in submission, but in the formal acknowledgement of equals. That Kale had learned represented the highest form of respect. In Shadow Maw culture, the rescue had become something far more significant. The first successful diplomatic contact between humanity and one of the galaxy's most feared species. And as word of this achievement spread beyond Zirian 7, it would begin a transformation that neither species could have imagined. 6 months after the incident on Zirian 7, Kale Torres stood in the observation deck of the Harmony Station, humanity's first interspecies diplomatic facility. Through the reinforced transparent aluminum windows, he watched an impossible sight: human children playing alongside young Shadow Maws in the station's environmental gardens, their laughter mixing with the soft chittering sounds that marked contentment. In the alien species, the transformation hadn't been easy. Initial skepticism from both the Galactic Council and Earth's colonial administration had nearly derailed the project before it began. Traditional xenobiologists argued that predatory species couldn't be trusted, while military advisors worried about security implications. But the evidence was undeniable. The Shadow Maws had been attempting communication with various species for decades, waiting for someone to approach them with respect rather than fear. The Kithara delegation arrives tomorrow, Captain Chen said, joining Kale at the observation window. She'd accepted the position as Harmony Station's first commander, trading her military career for something unprecedented: the role of humanity's first interstellar diplomatic officer. Whisper thinks they'll be the most challenging so far. Kale nodded, watching his old friend demonstrate hunting techniques to a group of fascinated human researchers. Whisper had become something of a celebrity in xenobiological circles, but more importantly, she'd become the primary liaison between her pack and the growing human presence in their territory. The trust that had begun in that cave had expanded into something that was reshaping galactic politics. The Kithara have been hunting Shadow Maws for their telepathic organs for 3 centuries, Kale replied. Whisper's people have every reason to see them as enemies, but if we can mediate a peace agreement, it would prove that the alliance model works. Chen finished. That respect and understanding can overcome even generations of conflict. The concept had been simple in theory, revolutionary in practice. Instead of the traditional approach of studying species from a distance, or attempting to impose human values, the Interspecies Alliance Protocol was based on the principles Kale had discovered in that cave: approach with respect, listen before speaking, and recognize that every species had something valuable to offer. The results had exceeded everyone's expectations. The Shadow Maw's telepathic abilities had proven invaluable for diplomatic communication, allowing emotional context and intentions to be shared directly rather than lost in translation. Their understanding of territorial dynamics had helped resolve a dozen border disputes between other species. Most surprisingly, their pack-based social structure had provided a framework for multi-species cooperation that no political scientist had ever conceived. Dr. Webb appeared at the observation deck's entrance, carrying a data pad and wearing the slightly dazed expression that had become his permanent state. Since beginning his work with the Shadow Maws, his initial aggression had been replaced by something approaching reverence. Once he'd realized the complexity of what he'd been studying, the latest reports from the outer colonies, he said, handing the pad to Chen. 3 more species have requested mediation through the Alliance Protocol, including the Stellar Mantis Confederation. Kale felt his eyebrows rise. The Stellar Mantis were one of the galaxy's oldest civilizations, proud and technologically advanced. For them to request mediation through a program that featured human Shadow Maw cooperation was a diplomatic coup of unprecedented magnitude. What's the issue? Chen asked, scrolling through the report. Territory disputes with the mineral extraction consortiums, Webb explained. But here's the interesting part. They specifically requested that Whisper be part of the mediation team. Apparently, her reputation for fair dealing has spread beyond this sector. Through the windows, Kale watched Whisper finish her demonstration and look up toward the observation deck. Even across the distance, he felt the familiar tingle of telepathic contact, not intrusive, but acknowledging, like a friend's nod across a crowded room. Their bond had evolved from the desperate circumstances of that first meeting into something that transcended species boundaries entirely. "She's been teaching the young ones about patience," Kale said, nodding toward where several human and Shadow Maw juveniles were engaged in what appeared to be a complex game involving telepathic communication and physical coordination. "Apparently, it's a concept that translates well across species lines." The game was actually a sophisticated training exercise in interspecies cooperation, developed by the Shadow Maws to teach both human and alien young the subtle art of nonverbal communication. Watching it, Kale was struck again by how much humanity had underestimated the emotional and cultural sophistication of species they dismissed as mere predators. An alert chimed on Chen's communicator, and she glanced at the incoming message with a smile that was becoming more common as positive reports arrived from around the galaxy. "The Arcturus colony just signed a protection agreement with a pack of crystal worms," she announced. "Instead of fighting over the mining rights, they're working together. The worms get protection for their nesting sites. The colonists get help with deep core extraction. Everyone wins." It was the model they'd been developing since that first contact on Sirian 7. Find the mutual benefit, respect the other party's needs, and build trust through consistent action. Rather than grand gestures, simple principles that were transforming humanity's relationships with species that had been considered impossible to work with. As the station's lights began to dim toward evening cycle, Kale made his way to the diplomatic quarters where Whisper maintained her residence. The Shadow Maw had adapted to station life with remarkable flexibility, though she still insisted on maintaining a den-like space that reminded her of home. "Tomorrow brings new challenges," Kale said as he entered, using the gestural language that had become second nature to both of them. The telepathic connection that had saved his life had evolved into something deeper, not just communication, but true friendship across the species divide. Whisper's response carried the complex emotional undertones he'd learned to interpret, anticipation mixed with caution, hope tempered by experience, and underneath it all, the steady confidence that had made her such an effective diplomat. But there was something else in her mental touch, something that made Kale pause and pay closer attention. Images flashed through their connection, not of the coming negotiations, but of distant stars and species yet unknown. Whisper's pack network had been sharing information across vast distances, and the news they brought was extraordinary. Other species were watching. Civilizations that had remained hidden from galactic politics were beginning to emerge, drawn by reports of the impossible. Humans and Shadow Maws working together, predator and prey species finding common ground, the fierce beasts of a dozen worlds choosing cooperation over conflict. The alliance that had begun in a cave during a blizzard was becoming something larger than anyone had imagined. Across the galaxy, the fiercest beasts were no longer hiding or fighting. They were choosing to trust, to engage, to become part of something unprecedented in galactic history. And at the center of it all, the simple truth that Kale had discovered in his darkest hour: respect, empathy, and courage weren't just the keys to survival, they were the foundation of a civilization that could span the stars. As Sirian 7's aurora painted the station's windows in sheets of green and gold, Kale, Torres, and Whisper settled into plan for a future where the word beast would be remembered only as a relic of humanity's less enlightened past, when they had confused power with worthiness and fear with wisdom. Asterisk.